picture this. You're in the middle of a violent ocean storm, right? Like specifically in the 17th century.
Oh, setting the scene right away. I love it.
Yeah, well, you have to visualize it to really feel the terror. So the absolute most terrifying thing to a sailor in that situation, it wasn't actually an enemy galleon appearing on the horizon.
Because you're already in a storm.
Exactly. And it wasn't lightning. It wasn't even the ship capsizing, which is, usually the biggest fear.
Yeah, that would be my biggest fear, honestly.
Right. But no, the ultimate nightmare was this 3,000-pound block of solid bronze snapping its ropes and just rolling freely across a wet, pitching wooden deck.
It's just massive, raw, kinetic energy.
Completely. It crushed literally everything in its path, and you couldn't stop it. You just had to run. And the crazy thing is, today, like 300 years later, we still use that exact maritime nightmare to describe, Bud from accounting.
That is so true. Bob is terrifying in his own way.
He really is. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It really is incredible when you frame it that way. I mean, we are surrounded by these eccentric, beautifully bizarre, or sometimes genuinely chaotic people in our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Like every single workplace, every extended family, every friend group has at least that one person who completely defies all standard logic and social conformity.
Yes, that one person. You're probably thinking of them right now as you listen to this. But the thing is, when we talk about them, we default to the most criminally boring language imaginable.
We really do. We just kind of shrug.
Right. We shrug and say, yeah, he acts weird, or she's kind of crazy. And it is such a linguistic tragedy, honestly.
It is. Because weird is just this flat, lifeless word.
Completely lifeless. And doesn't tell me if this person is a brilliant visionary who is going to change the world, or if they are a genuine hazard to everyone around them.
Exactly. Which is why the material we are going through today is so incredibly vital. We have this linguistic masterclass in front of us focusing on advanced C2 level English idioms.
And the origins of these phrases are just wild.
They are. It pulls from the most extreme corners of human history. We're talking naval warfare, Gothic architecture, Renaissance literature, all to give us the exact vocabulary we need to describe the eccentricities of the human mind.
Because people have always struggled to articulate what it means when someone just doesn't fit in.
Right, and they had to borrow imagery from literal life or death situations to do it effectively.
So by the time we are done with this deep dive, you listening right now, you are going to be equipped with this incredibly sophisticated vocabulary. You will never have to just say someone acts weird ever again.
It's an absolute upgrade for your daily conversation.
Total upgrade. And we're going to take you through a very specific psychological arc today. We are starting in the light, like the beautiful, positive side of independent thought.
The fun stuff.
Yeah, the quirky, harmless stuff. But then we're going to wade into the danger zone where unpredictable behavior actually threatens a group.
That's where it gets tense.
Very tense. And from there, we are descending into the architecture of utter delusion. And finally, we'll look at the sheer physical exhaustion you experience when someone else's madness essentially becomes your problem.
It's basically the entire spectrum of human nonconformity.
It really is. So starting in the light, as we said, we have to look at the most benign form of eccentricity.
Right, the people who simply refuse to conform to society's timeline.
Yeah, the ones who are just fundamentally wired differently.
Exactly. And the phrase that historically captures this comes from the mid-19th century, credited largely to the American philosopher Henry David Thoreau. We say, this person marches to the beat of a different drum.
It is such a gorgeous phrase. I mean, it's very poetic.
It is, but to really feel the weight of it, you kind of have to strip away the poetry for a second. You have to look at the literal historical reality of a marching army.
Oh, right, because back then it wasn't just a casual stroll.
No, not at all. If you look at military tactics from the 18th and 19th centuries, an army wasn't just a group of guys walking in the same general direction.
Right, they had to be perfectly synchronized.
Exactly. It was a massive mechanical organism that relied on absolute, unquestioning biological conformity.
Biological conformity. I like how you phrase that, because they literally had to move as one body.
They did. You have thousands of soldiers who have to move their feet at the exact same millisecond. They have to wheel, turn, load, and fire in perfect unison.
And in the chaos of a battlefield, I mean, with cannons firing, smoke everywhere, men yelling, how do you keep thousands of people synchronized like that?
You use a snare drum.
The snare drum. Right. It cuts through the fog of war.
It does. It is this strict, monotonous, relentless rhythm. Thwack, thwack, thwack.
It isn't just a musical beat. It's literally the heartbeat of survival for the whole unit.
Exactly. If you break the rhythm, you step on the heel of the guy in front of you.
And then the formation collapses.
Yes, the formation collapses and the enemy cavalry just runs you over. The drum is the ultimate enforcer of conformity.
Okay, so keeping that intense pressure to conform in mind, visualize the metaphor here. You have this massive regimen of thousands of people, all unified by this really loud snare drum.
Right.
And right in the middle of the formation, there is one single soldier who is walking entirely out of sync.
You're just completely off rhythm.
Yeah, his foot comes down when everyone else's goes up.
But the psychological nuance here is what makes the phrase so empathetic, I think.
How so?
Well, when you picture that one soldier, he isn't staging a mutiny, he isn't throwing down his musket and screaming at the commander or anything.
Right, he isn't trying to be actively rebellious or difficult.
No, not at all. The phrase is marches to the beat of a different drum. It implies he's actively listening to something.
Oh, I see. His internal tempo.
Exactly. The rhythm playing in his own mind is simply different from the external tempo of the group. He isn't wrong. He is just attuned to a frequency the rest of the regiment literally cannot hear.
I think about how this applies today, and it's so relevant. Like, you look at a group of friends who are all in their late 20s.
Oh yeah, the societal pressure cooker.
Exactly. There is a societal snare drum beating loudly for them. It's like, get the promotion, buy the house, get the gray suit, invest in the 401k, thwack, thwack.
Whack. And almost everyone falls into line because it feels safe. It's what you're supposed to do.
Right. But then you have that one friend who completely ignores the timeline. They sell everything, and they move to a tiny cabin in the woods to paint landscapes for 5 years.
And they aren't doing it to protest the 401k.
Exactly. They just literally do not feel the pull of that rhythm. The societal expectation just bounces right off them.
Or even on a smaller scale, right?
Yeah.
Think about the guy who casually wears a bright, vibrant Hawaiian shirt to a deeply serious, stuffy corporate board meeting.
Where every single other person is wearing a dark navy suit.
He isn't doing it maliciously. He isn't trying to mock the CEO or be disruptive.
He just woke up, liked the shirt, and legitimately prefers his own vibe.
Exactly. He just doesn't hear the drumbeat of corporate dress codes.
And honestly, society fundamentally relies on these people.
Oh, absolutely. If everyone always marched to the exact same drum, culture would just stagnate.
We need the artists, the philosophers, the weirdos in the Hawaiian shirts, because their independent lifestyle almost always breeds a very specific kind of non-linear thinking.
Which brings us to how these people actually interact in a group setting.
Right, because it's one thing to live in a cabin in the woods by yourself.
Yes.
It's another thing entirely when that non-linear thinker sits down at a conference table with you.
That's when things get interesting.
Very. When they share an idea, it rarely follows the logical A to B to C progression that the rest of us use. The phrase we use is that their idea comes out of left field.
It's a brilliant spatial metaphor, honestly. We're jumping from 19th century battlefields to the geometry of an American baseball stadium.
I love this one.
To understand why a thought coming out of left field is so jarring, you really have to understand how a baseball diamond is structured.
Right, most of the action happens in a very specific area.
Exactly. The vast majority of the fast, high-stakes action happens in the infield, this tight 90-foot square around the bases.
The infield is where the rhythm is super predictable. The ball is hit, the shortstop scoops it up, flips it to first base. It takes maybe 3 seconds.
It's a tightly choreographed, logical dance. Everyone knows exactly what is supposed to happen.
But the left fielder is positioned way, way out on the distant grassy edge of the stadium.
They are incredibly isolated from that tight infield action. I mean, they're standing hundreds of feet away.
So imagine a play where everyone is intensely focused on the infield. There are runners on base, the tension is high, everyone is doing the mental math of the tight, quick plays.
Right, everyone's dialed in.
And suddenly, the left fielder gets the ball, completely ignores the standard protocol of throwing to a nearby cutoff man, winds up, and just heaves the baseball all the way across this massive, expansive distance directly to home plate.
And because of that sheer physical distance, the ball hangs in the air for what feels like an eternity. Time almost stops.
It's a highly unusual trajectory.
Very. It breaks the established rhythm of the game, and it catches the runners, the other players, and the entire audience completely off guard.
They literally have to freeze and process this massive incoming variable.
And when you translate that massive physical distance across a baseball stadium into cognitive distance in a conversation, It maps perfectly.
An idea from left field has a massive hang time.
Exactly. It seems entirely disconnected from whatever topic the group is currently focused on.
I think the source material had a great example of this.
Yeah, I was reading this account of a corporate strategy meeting that illustrates this beautifully.
Well, the budget meeting one?
Yes. Picture a deeply tense, aggressive budget meeting. Spreadsheets are up on the projector screen. The accounting team is arguing over like 3% margin adjustments for Q3.
The room is locked into this tight, logical A to B infield rhythm.
Exactly. And right in the middle of a sentence about supply chain logistics, the marketing director leans forward, completely sincere, and suggests the company should purchase a branded hot air balloon.
Oh my gosh, the collective brain of the room just freezes.
It just shuts down. The cognitive distance between Q3 margin adjustments and hot air balloon is hundreds of feet.
The idea is just hanging in the air, and everyone is staring at the marketing director, trying to figure out how they possibly made that leap.
Or, I've seen this happen too.
Yeah.
You have a colleague you've worked with for 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And on a random Tuesday, with zero subtle clues or buildup, they announce they are quitting to become a full-time beekeeper in Vermont.
It leaves the group totally speechless because they didn't show you the math that got them there. The idea just arrived, fully formed, completely out of nowhere.
Out of left field.
But hold on, let's look at the reality of that budget meeting for a second. Is that hot air balloon idea actually a good thing?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it?
Yeah, because when we talk about visionaries who think differently, we tend to romanticize them. But if I'm the accountant trying to finalize that spreadsheet, I am not thinking, what a visionary genius.
No, you're annoyed.
Highly annoyed. I'm thinking, you just derailed an incredibly important meeting with absolute nonsense.
That is the essential tension of the left field thinker. And it's a crucial point to make. It straddles a razor-thin line.
It really does.
Sometimes, that massive cognitive leap is the actual hallmark of genius. It takes a non-linear leap to solve the systemic problem that all the linear step-by-step thinkers have been stuck on for months.
Maybe the hot air balloon is exactly the viral marketing stunt that saves the quarter.
Right. But you are entirely right. It can also be a massive unhelpful disruption. If the group is doing critical, detail-oriented work, a left field idea isn't visionary in that moment. It is a complete breakdown of group focus.
Which naturally pushes us out of the light and directly into the danger zone.
Yes, the transition to chaos.
Because a random thought about a hot air balloon is ultimately harmless. You roll your eyes, you redirect the meeting, and you move on.
Yeah, it's just a blip.
But there is a point where a person's eccentricity stops being a quirky distraction and becomes a genuine, massive threat to the people around them.
And that is where the vocabulary shifts. We stop using metaphors about sports and music, and we start using metaphors rooted in catastrophic disaster.
We are moving into the territory of the loose cannon.
One of the most evocative phrases in English, honestly.
It really is. And to truly appreciate the sheer visceral terror embedded in this phrase, we have to go back to our intro, back to 17th century naval warfare.
This is an era where the superpowers of the world fought on massive wooden warships on the open ocean.
And the primary weapons on these ships were cannons. But we really need to be clear about what a 17th century naval cannon actually is.
Right, it's not a rifle. It's not something you carry.
No, it is a massive cylinder of solid bronze or iron. These things weighed upwards of 3,000 pounds.
That is the weight of a modern Honda Civic condensed into a block of metal.
Exactly. And you are putting this massive weight on a wooden ship that is constantly pitching, rolling, and swaying on the ocean.
The physics of it are just terrifying to even think about.
The crew absolutely knew the sheer kinetic energy stored in that weight, so they secured them with extreme prejudice.
They had to. They used incredibly thick ropes, heavy iron rings, and these complex pulley systems to tie these cannons tightly to the wooden walls, the bulwarks of the ship.
So if I'm a sailor, my life depends entirely on those ropes holding.
Completely.
Because what happens when the weather turns? Imagine being on one of those ships in the dead of night. A massive Atlantic storm hits.
The waves are 30, 40 feet high.
The ship is being tossed back and forth at 45-degree angles. The wood is groaning. The tension on those ropes holding the 3,000-pound cannons is just immense.
And then over the sound of the howling wind, you hear a thick hemp rope snap.
Oh, man. It would be a sound that stops your heart.
Because in that moment, you have a loose cannon. You have an untethered 3,000-pound cylinder of solid metal.
And as the ship violently rocks to the left, that massive weight rolls freely across the wet wooden deck, accelerating with gravity.
It is a machine of indiscriminate destruction. It doesn't care who is in the way.
It will crush a sailor's legs instantly.
It'll smash into the opposite wall of the ship, splintering the wood, potentially blowing a hole right through the hull and sinking the entire vessel.
And the sailors couldn't just stand there and catch it. I mean, they had to try and throw hammocks or heavy nets over it to slow it down, risking their lives to recapture this violent kinetic energy.
The unpredictability is the absolute core of the terror here. You cannot reason with it.
You cannot negotiate with gravity in a storm.
Exactly. You have zero idea which way it will roll next. It is raw, unguided power.
So when we pull that historical nightmare into the modern office or our social circles, the translation is incredibly potent.
The loose cannon in your organization isn't just weird. They are highly reckless.
They possess immense energy or talent, but they lack any internal mechanism for self-control.
The classic corporate example is the brilliant, high-performing salesperson.
Oh, we've all met one.
Right. They have immense charisma, they close massive deals, they bring in huge revenue, they provide the essential firepower for the company, just like a cannon provides firepower for the warship.
A warship without cannons is defenseless. A company without revenue dies. You absolutely need them.
But there's this agonizing anxiety that comes with managing them.
Yes, because you know they are valuable, but you have zero control over how their energy will be directed on any given day.
If you put this brilliant, volatile salesman in a boardroom with your most sensitive, important client, you are sitting there sweating through your shirt.
Sweaty palms, elevated heart rate, the whole thing.
Because you never know how the ship is going to roll.
Are they going to use that explosive energy to charm the client and close a $10 million deal?
Or are they going to get slightly offended by a passing comment, lose their temper, go completely off script, and utterly insult the client to their face?
Ruining a relationship that took 5 years to build.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword. Their unpredictability is the exact source of their power, but it is also the very thing that might sink the entire company.
You can't put them in front of the press. You can't trust them on social media. They are a loose cannon.
Exactly.
But what if the danger isn't an explosion of reckless energy? What if the unpredictability is quieter?
That's a different kind of problem.
Right. What if the problem isn't their temper, but a deep, fundamental flaw in their actual logic?
That shifts the metaphorical landscape entirely. If a loose cannon acts erratically, people worry about the immediate collateral damage.
But if a person continues to act nonsensically over a long period without the explosive energy, people stop worrying about their temper and begin to quietly question their grip on reality.
They start to wonder if the cognitive machinery itself is broken.
And the English language handles this transition in a really fascinating way. We drop the violent metaphors of naval disasters and we suddenly shift to the quiet mathematical precision of a casino parlor.
It's such a tonal shift. When someone's logic is fundamentally compromised, we say they are not playing with a full deck.
It is a beautiful metaphor rooted entirely in the rigid rules of probability.
Think about a standard deck of playing cards. To play poker, blackjack, bridge, or any standard game, that deck requires exactly 52 cards.
52 cards, no more, no less.
Exactly. Every single rule, every mathematical odd, every betting strategy is built on the absolute foundation of those 52 cards being present in the ecosystem.
It functions like a closed, perfect little universe of math. So what happens if I sit down at the poker table, the dealer shuffles, but unknown to me, there are only 49 cards in the deck?
The entire system collapses instantly.
The math is irreparably broken.
You might draw a hand that looks good, but the odds of someone else having a better hand are now entirely skewed in ways you literally cannot calculate.
The game cannot function according to reality. The rules no longer apply.
So idiomatically, when we say a person is not playing with a full deck, we are saying that their internal cognitive ecosystem is short a few cards.
They are missing crucial pieces of basic logic.
They lack common sense. Or, more seriously, their grip on shared reality is actively slipping.
I read this incredible anecdote in the source material about a guy who was completely earnest in his belief that the best way to heat up his backyard swimming pool for a party.
Oh, I remember this one.
He thought the best way was to plug in a standard kitchen microwave, attach it to a long industrial extension cord, and just throw the running microwave directly into the deep end of the pool.
Oh my God. That is terrifying.
If someone suggests that to you, you aren't dealing with a visionary who marches to a different drum.
No, you are dealing with someone who is missing the cards for basic electrical safety and physics.
Or think about the person who corners you at a neighborhood barbecue. You're just trying to eat your hot dog, and they spend 30 unbroken minutes trying to convince you that the 1969 moon landing was completely fake.
Oh, but their specific theory is even better.
Yes. Their theory is that it was faked using highly advanced underwater cameras in a giant municipal pool in Ohio.
When you are presented with arguments like that, you realize there is a structural deficit in their logic.
You can't argue with them using facts because they aren't playing the same mathematical game you are.
But I'm looking at this phrase, not playing with a full deck, and it feels so much gentler than calling someone a loose cannon.
It really does. A loose cannon sounds like an accusation, like you are dangerous.
But saying someone is a few cards short of a full deck sounds almost whimsical.
It's folksy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do we use a harmless parlor game to describe what is essentially intellectual deficiency or cognitive decline?
It is entirely intentional. It acts as a linguistic buffer.
A buffer, right.
Not playing with a full deck is a polite, humorous, euphemistic way to suggest someone's logic is flawed without being overtly cruel or aggressive.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you look at your neighbor and say, your idea to throw a microwave in the pool means you are intellectually deficient and losing your grip on reality, you are going to start a fist fight.
Yeah, that's a relationship-ending sentence. You can't walk that back.
Exactly. It's too direct. But by framing the deficiency around a card game, it softens the blow.
It allows a group of people to collectively acknowledge the bizarre or dangerous behavior while maintaining a thin veneer of social politeness.
It is a coping mechanism. Society uses humor to deal with the uncomfortable reality of cognitive decline without resorting to outright cruelty.
That makes total sense. We use a card game to avoid the harsh reality.
But there is a limit to how long a polite euphemism can hold up.
Unfortunately, yes.
If someone is just missing a few cards, maybe they just have some wacky conspiracy theories, but what happens if they continue to lose cards?
Eventually, that flawed logic gives way to total inner chaos. They aren't just confused about physics. Their own mind becomes a terrifying place.
And this is where the polite metaphors fail us. We have to move out of the casino and step into the realm of true psychological tragedy and madness.
We enter the architecture of delusion.
And the architecture here is quite literal. The next idiom is an absolutely spectacular, spooky, deeply Gothic metaphor.
It really is.
When someone has completely lost touch with reality, when their mind is consumed by erratic chaos, we say they have bats in the belfry.
To unpack the sheer, overwhelming atmosphere of this phrase, we first have to define what a belfry is because, it's not a super common word anymore.
Right. Picture a towering, ancient stone Gothic church or cathedral. Think of Notre Dame or a massive medieval abbey.
The belfry is the very top room of that towering structure. It is the chamber where the massive, heavy bronze bells are kept.
So visualize this space. It is not a cozy, welcoming room.
Not at all.
It is incredibly high up, exposed to the wind. It is dark, full of deep shadows, massive wooden support beams, and cold stone walls.
And then most importantly, because it's so high up and the bells are operated by ropes from way down below, the belfry is rarely, if ever, visited by humans.
It is a dark, isolated cavern at the absolute peak of a towering structure.
Which makes it the perfect undisturbed habitat for a massive colony of bats to move in.
They find the dark rafters, they hang upside down, and they sleep in the shadows.
Now, map this architectural metaphor explicitly to human anatomy. It is brilliant.
The towering stone church represents the human body.
And that dark, isolated belfry at the very top, that represents the human head, the skull.
And the bats hiding in the shadows represent the erratic, crazy, chaotic thoughts living inside that skull.
But the metaphor only comes alive when you imagine the acoustic reality of what happens next.
Oh, this is the best part.
The bats are sleeping peacefully in the skull. And then it's time for Sunday Mass.
The massive bronze bells in that belfry are suddenly rung.
The sheer decibel level, the deafening acoustic vibration inside that small enclosed stone room would be apocalyptic.
Because bats navigate via sonar, right? Via echolocation.
Exactly. When a massive bronze bell rings feet away from them, it literally shatters their spatial awareness.
The sensory chaos. The bell rings and this entire colony of bats is instantly terrified.
They drop from the rafters and they just start flying wildly around the small stone room in absolute screeching, blind panic.
They are ricocheting off the walls, colliding with each other in the dark, entirely unable to escape the deafening noise.
That chaotic, screeching panic inside the closed belfry is the visual and auditory representation of madness.
To say someone has bats in the belfry means their mind is filled with erratic, uncontrollable, chaotic thoughts.
They're deeply confused, highly eccentric, or tragically suffering from genuine cognitive decline.
I think about the examples we see in real life. It's the elderly great aunt who walks around the neighborhood at 2 a.m. wearing a heavy winter coat in July.
Singing loud Italian opera music exclusively to the stray cats in the alley. Yes.
Or it's the brilliant tenured university professor who suddenly starts delivering lectures that are just a word salad of deeply confused, paranoid, chaotic ideas, completely disconnected from the syllabus.
Both of those examples highlight a very specific, mournful tone that this idiom carries.
Yes. Because unlike the loose cannon, where we feel anxiety and anger, the bats in the belfry evokes a deep sense of empathetic tragedy.
When we say someone has bats in the belfry, we usually say it with a sigh.
We often deeply love the people we describe this way. We recognize they are acting bizarrely, but the phrasing frames their madness as something that is happening to them.
That is the core distinction. The panic is trapped inside their skull.
They aren't choosing to cause chaos like the reckless salesman.
No. They are just the unfortunate host to these terrifying, chaotic thoughts. It is a profoundly empathetic way to describe someone whose mind is betraying them.
It is a tragedy of the internal mind. But what happens when the madness doesn't stay internal?
Well, then the danger spreads.
What happens when the chaotic bats in the belfry become so overwhelming that the person starts externalizing their delusion? They look out into the real world and they start projecting their inner chaos onto their environment.
They start seeing imaginary enemies.
That brings us to what is arguably the most elite literary C2 level metaphor in the entire English language.
Oh, this one is a classic.
When an eccentric person begins to aggressively attack imaginary threats, we say they are tilting at windmills.
This one is an absolute masterpiece of human psychology. It comes directly from Miguel de Cervantes' legendary early 17th century novel, Don Quixote.
For anyone who hasn't read it or hasn't read it in 20 years, we need to explore the psychology of this specific scene because it completely defines the concept of delusion.
The novel follows an aging, impoverished Spanish gentleman. He has read way too many romantic novels about chivalry and knights, and he slowly loses his mind.
He renames himself Don Quixote, puts on a rusty suit of armor, and rides out to be a hero.
And in the most famous scene, he is riding his horse across the dusty plains of La Mancha, and he sees a group of massive wooden agricultural windmills operating in the distance.
But his grip on reality is entirely gone. He cannot accept the mundane, boring reality of a windmill grinding grain.
So his brain literally overwrites reality.
He suffers a complete, profound hallucination. He looks at these spinning wooden structures, and he genuinely, down to his bones, believes they are a race of giant, evil monsters with long, sweeping arms threatening the countryside.
Which is such a fascinating psychological defense mechanism.
It is. He would rather live in a terrifying fantasy where he is a necessary hero than live in a boring reality where he's just a sad old man.
So seeing these monsters, what does he do? He attacks.
And this is where we have to clarify the word tilting. Because if you aren't familiar with medieval combat, you probably just picture someone tilting a picture frame slightly to the left.
Right, like straightening a painting.
Yeah.
But in the context of medieval jousting, tilting is a highly specific, highly aggressive martial term.
It means taking a massive 15-pound wooden lance, tucking it firmly under your arm, pointing it straight forward, and kicking your horse into a full-speed charge directly at your enemy.
It is maximum violence. So Don Quixote lowers his lance, he tilts, and he charges his horse at 30 miles an hour directly into the stone and wood of a spinning windmill.
He shatters his weapon, he gets thrown from his horse, he gets physically battered.
He is fighting a noble life-or-death battle against a threat that exists entirely, 100% in his own imagination.
And so, in modern English, tilting at windmills has become the ultimate shorthand for pursuing an impossible, highly idealistic goal or fighting imaginary enemies.
It is attacking a non-existent threat with absolute uncompromising sincerity.
And we see this everywhere today. Think about the local activist who spends 20 entire years of their life writing furious, multi-page letters to the city council, desperately trying to get neighborhood Wi-Fi routers banned because they genuinely believe the invisible signals are a government mind control weapon.
They're fighting a monster that doesn't exist.
Or on a more relatable level, it perfectly describes the psychology of the internet troll.
Yes, think of the person who wastes 6 hours a day aggressively arguing in the comment sections of obscure YouTube videos with anonymous strangers.
Exactly. The internet arguer is the modern Don Quixote. They are putting on their digital armor, lowering their keyboard lance, and charging at someone they will never meet over a topic that does not matter in a battle they cannot possibly win.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
But I want to pause here and dig into the intent, because this is where the phrase gets tricky. Does the internet troll know they can't win?
That's the real question.
Are they just doing it to blow off steam? Or is the core of the idiom that the person truly believes the monsters are real?
The absolute core of tilting at windmills is genuine, unironic belief. If you are doing a task, is pointless just to waste time or troll someone, you aren't tilting at windmills. You're just being a jerk.
Okay, so it has to be a total detachment from reality.
Exactly. Don Quixote didn't charge and think, I know these are windmills, but I'm bored, so I'll hit them anyway.
He believed with his whole heart that he was fighting giants.
The tragedy of the idiom is the absolute sincerity in the face of an imaginary enemy. They are destroying themselves for a noble cause that simply isn't real.
It is the ultimate heartbreaking delusion. But as we move into the final phase of this arc, we have to look at the fallout.
The collateral damage.
Right, because it's one thing to watch a quirky visionary march to a different drum from afar. It's one thing to affectionately observe an old relative with bats in the belfry, or watch someone tilt at their own personal internet windmills.
You can observe those things from a safe distance.
But eccentricity doesn't happen in a vacuum. Madness has a blast radius.
It really does. What happens when someone else's madness directly impacts you?
What happens when a boss who isn't playing with a full deck or a manager who is tilting at windmills forces you to become an active participant in their delusion?
They drag you into the chaos and you have to do all the legwork.
And this brings us to an idiom that perfectly, viscerally captures the sheer physical and mental exhaustion of dealing with someone else's unpredictable behavior.
Being sent on a wild goose chase.
I love this phrase so much because it sounds almost cute and folksy at first, but the imagery is actually brutal.
It really is. This phrase was popularized by William Shakespeare, specifically in Romeo and Juliet.
Let's break down the biology of the animal at the center of this metaphor. Why a wild goose? Why not a wild chicken chase? Or a wild rabbit chase?
Well, if you have ever had the misfortune of actually encountering a wild goose in an open park or a field, you know exactly why Shakespeare chose it.
They are mean.
They are formidable, highly aggressive creatures. They are surprisingly large. They are incredibly fast on foot. They can fly. And most importantly for the metaphor, their movements are completely erratic.
And their vision, right.
Yes, they have nearly 360-degree vision. You cannot sneak up on them. They dictate the terms of the engagement completely.
So walk us through the physically exhausting, utterly absurd reality of a human being trying to actually catch a wild goose in an open, muddy field with their bare hands.
It's an exercise in absolute futility and humiliation.
I can picture the mud now.
You sprint to the left, the goose sees you, honks loudly, and suddenly darts to the right.
You lunge forward into the mud, it flaps its massive wings, completely changes direction, and zigzags away.
You are running in frantic circles, slipping, falling, constantly changing your momentum to react to this unpredictable aggressive bird.
You are burning massive amounts of energy.
And eventually, after you have completely drained yourself and you're covered head to toe in mud, the goose simply spreads its wings, takes off, and flies away into the sky.
And what is the net result of all that frantic, humiliating effort?
You achieve absolutely nothing. You are exhausted, filthy, and entirely empty-handed.
So take that hopeless, absurd, muddy pursuit and drop it straight into the modern workplace.
That's a perfect parallel.
The wild goose chase represents a massive waste of time generated by bad information or an eccentric, unpredictable request from someone in a position of power.
Let's look at a scenario that is going to make anyone who has ever worked in a corporate office groan in deep, painful recognition.
Please do.
Picture a senior manager who bursts into the office bullpen at 3:00 p.m. on a Friday in an absolute panic.
Worst time for a panic.
Right. They claim they have lost a set of highly sensitive, crucial master keys to the building. Security risk is massive, so they mobilize the entire department.
Everyone drops what they're doing.
For 3 grueling hours, 20 people stop their actual work. They are on their hands and knees searching under desks, digging through the cafeteria trash cans, retracing steps out to the parking lot.
You are basically zigzagging in the mud.
Exactly. And then, at 6:00 p.m., after everyone is exhausted and furious, the manager casually reaches into the inner pocket of their own coat, pulls out the keys, and says, "Oh, silly me. Here they are. Have a great weekend, everyone."
It makes my blood pressure spike just hearing the story. That was a wild goose chase. The manager's complete lack of organization became your physical exhaustion.
It's so draining.
And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Because in this idiom, you are not the quirky visionary. You are not the left field thinker. You are the one doing the zigzagging.
You are the one covered in mud.
Think about the last time you were sent on a hopeless pursuit. Maybe a friend completely convinced you to drive to 5 different obscure thrift stores across the city looking for a specific ultra-rare vintage jacket that, it turns out, didn't even exist.
Or a boss asked you to compile a massive, highly detailed 50-page data report over a holiday weekend.
Oh, that's the worst.
You ruin your weekend, you pull an all-nighter, you hand it in on Monday morning, and they just shrug and say, actually, I decided to go in a completely different direction. I don't need this anymore.
They don't even open the file.
No, they just toss it.
That deep, hollow exhaustion you feel in your chest in that moment, that is the exhaustion of the wild goose chase. You chased the bird, and it just flew away.
It is the collateral damage of someone else's erratic behavior.
And that feeling beautifully, if somewhat tragically, completes the psychological arc we set out to explore today. We have traversed a massive landscape of human behavior.
We really have, from the harmless to the completely unhinged.
Let's trace the journey we've taken through these historical metaphors. We started in the light, celebrating the positive, independent spirit of the person who hears their own internal rhythm and has the courage to march to the beat of a different drum.
We looked at how their unconventional, nonlinear ideas can stun a room by coming completely out of left field.
But then we crossed into the danger zone. We examined the terrifying physical unpredictability of the loose cannon snapping its ropes on the deck of a warship in a storm.
We shifted to the flawed, broken mathematical universe of someone who is not playing with a full deck.
From there, we stepped into the dark, towering Gothic architecture of the mind to witness the chaotic, screeching panic of having bats in the belfry.
We watched the tragic, total delusion of a knight charging his horse at full speed, tilting at windmills.
And finally, we felt the sheer, absurd, humiliating exhaustion of being dragged through the HUD on a wild goose chase.
The masterpiece painted by exploring these phrases is the realization that human psychology hasn't changed in hundreds of years.
It really hasn't. Whether you are on a 17th century galleon riding a horse in Renaissance Spain or sitting in a Zoom meeting in 2026, we have always had to deal with the beautifully bizarre, the visionaries, and the dangerously delusional.
And why does knowing all this matter to you?
Right. Why do we care?
Because by understanding the rich historical and literal depths of these idioms, you are now equipped to navigate your social conversations with a whole new level of precision.
When someone acts erratically, you don't have to just shrug and say they're acting weird.
You can perfectly sophisticatedly articulate the exact flavor and danger level of their psychological quirk.
You are now culturally attuned to the nuance of human behavior. You have the vocabulary to match the complexity of the people around you.
Exactly. You are the smartest person in the room when it comes to describing the weirdest person in the room.
I love that.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own this week.
A little homework.
A thought that builds on everything we've uncovered today. Think about the origins of the incredibly rich language we just explored. It is entirely rooted in a physical, analog past.
Very physical. Obsolete warfare with 3,000-pound bronze cannons on wooden ships.
Medieval jousting and ashwood lances. Ancient, towering stone architecture with bronze bells and analog parlor games with paper playing cards.
The metaphors are deeply tactile. You can feel the wood, the bronze, the mud.
Right. So what does that mean for our future? As society becomes increasingly relentlessly digital, as our physical world shrinks into screens, how will we describe the unpredictable, eccentric people of tomorrow?
It raises a fascinating question about how technology dictates our psychological vocabulary. We pull metaphors from the tools we use to survive.
Exactly. Will the beautifully bizarre nonconformists of the future still be described using the snare drums of the Civil War? Or will they be described using metaphors of glitching software and failing algorithms?
That's a great point. Will the polite, euphemistic way to say someone has bats in the belfry simply become saying they have a glitch in their mainframe?
Or a corrupted hard drive? Will a loose cannon become a rogue AI or a jailbroken algorithm?
It's very likely.
As you go about your week and you inevitably run into that one person who completely defies all logic, I leave you to consider, as we lose touch with the analog world, how will the bizarre behaviors of the future finally be named?
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, right? And it feels like, I don't know, like engineering.
Yeah, very structural.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black film, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Right. Broken or not broken. It's a clean binary.
Right. It's an undeniable binary. But the moment you step out of orthopedics and into the world of human psychology or neurodevelopment or even just intense personality differences, that x-ray machine is entirely useless.
Oh, totally useless.
I mean, you can't put a complex, unconventional human mind into a scanner and point to a glowing red spot that explains why they act the way they do.
No, you really can't. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. When we're dealing with human behavior, especially behavior that really deviates from the statistical norm, we just don't have those jagged white lines. We have patterns, we have observations, and, well, most importantly, we have language. We rely on the linguistic tools we've developed over centuries to try and map out these invisible internal landscapes.
And that murkiness, that inability to just point at a simple, clear-cut line is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So we are pulling our material today from a masterclass transcript, and this originates from a C2 Advanced English Listening session.
Right.
The theme of this session is titled The Beautifully Bizarre. And what we have here is this spectacularly colorful, historically rich English vocabulary that has evolved specifically to describe one very specific, unavoidable phenomena.
The clash.
Yes, the clash between unconventional, eccentric minds and a society that is fundamentally built for conformity. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because these idioms, these phrases you might use every day without a second thought, they aren't just throwaway colloquialism.
No, not at all.
They act as this incredible, highly descriptive, cinematic toolkit to describe the absolute edges of human psychology.
They really do. And, to understand why this vocabulary is so necessary and why it possesses such vibrant and honestly often violent imagery, we first have to establish the core thesis of the source material.
Right. Let's lay the groundwork.
And that premise is simple but profound, which is that the world, by and large, is engineered for normal.
The default settings of society, basically.
Exactly. Just think about our foundational institutions, the traditional 9-to-5 workday, the layout of open-plan corporate offices, the standardized testing in our schools.
Ugh, yeah, the testing.
Right. Even the unspoken social rules at a neighborhood dinner party. These structures are not naturally occurring phenomena. They are meticulously designed systems of conformity.
They need a baseline.
Exactly. They require a certain baseline of...
So what happens when an unconventional person, someone whose brain fundamentally just does not operate on those default settings, is forced into one of these highly structured environments?
It's a disaster.
Like, what happens when you take someone who is naturally chaotic or intensely hyper-focused or deeply anti-authoritarian, and you just drop them into a cuticle farm?
You get friction, massive, grinding psychological friction. And the source material actually spends a lot of time emphasizing this incredibly fine line between creative genius and sheer madness.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Right, because on one side of the line, that unconventional rule-breaking thinking is the actual engine of human progress. I mean, it leads to brilliant art, scientific breakthroughs, paradigm-shifting technology.
But on the other side?
But on the other side of that exact same line, when that friction isn't managed properly, it leads to absurd logic, massive destructive overreactions, and just a complete detachment from reality.
It seems like society desperately wants the fruits of eccentric genius, but it has absolutely no idea how to actually handle the eccentric genius themselves.
We want the product, not the person.
Yes. We want the breathtaking masterpiece hanging in a gallery, but we do not want to deal with the artist screaming at the paint at 3 a.m. We want the revolutionary smartphone, but we can't stand the erratic CEO who fired half the engineering team on a whim.
Exactly.
And so we start our exploration at the very beginning of the eccentric's journey. Before the genius, before the madness, there's just the fundamental isolating feeling of not belonging, the innate friction of unconventionality.
Which introduces our first concept from the text, And it's a metaphor that is so visceral, so tactile, you can practically feel the physical resistance in your own hands just by saying it. We are talking about the feeling of being a square peg in a round hole.
Oh, I love the historical and literal origins of this phrase. They are firmly rooted in early carpentry and children's geometry.
It's so physical.
It really is. So I want you, the listener, to picture this physically. Imagine a classic child's wooden toy block. Solid, chunky piece of wood, and carved right into the center of it is a perfect, smooth, circular hole.
Okay, I see it.
Now, you hold a wooden peg that is completely square. It has 4 sharp, strict, rigid, 90-degree corners.
The geometry just flat out refuses to cooperate.
Right.
If you try to simply press that square peg into the round hole, it physically cannot fit. The math doesn't allow it. The sharp corners of the square are going to immediately hit the curved edges of the circle. I mean, they are fundamentally incompatible shapes occupying the same space.
But human beings are stubborn.
Very.
And society, when dealing with eccentric people, is incredibly stubborn. So if you get frustrated, which society often does, you grab a hammer.
You force it?
Exactly. You try to forcefully smash that square peg into the hole anyway. And what is the physical result of that kinetic force? You don't magically change the shape of the peg.
No, you don't.
You don't magically stretch the hole. You just break the wood. You splinter the peg. You fracture the block. You essentially destroy the structural integrity of the very thing you were trying to assemble through sheer ignorant force.
And that physical destruction is the perfect psychological application for this idiom.
It really translates so well.
It does. Because when we call someone a square peg in a round hole, we are describing a person whose inherent personality, whose unique skills, or whose sheer eccentricity makes them fundamentally unsuited for their current job, their role, or the environment they are currently trapped in.
The source material uses a wonderfully clear example for this.
The accounting firm, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Putting a brilliant, chaotic, abstract artist in charge of a strict accounting firm.
Oh, you can just picture the disaster.
I mean, you have the ledgers, the tax codes, the spreadsheets, the absolute unforgiving necessity for precision and rigid historical rules.
Everything has to balance perfectly.
Right. And then you drop someone in the manager's chair whose entire operating system is based on emotional expression, chaos, and abstraction.
It's not just a bad fit, it's a volatile chemical reaction waiting to happen. The crucial psychological takeaway here, though, is about assigning blame. The artist isn't broken for not understanding the tax code. And the accounting firm isn't broken for demanding strict adherence to the ledger.
Right, they both have value.
Immense value in their proper, isolated contexts. But the combination of the two is a functional disaster. The friction is simply too high to sustain.
You know, it makes me think of an analogy that might hit a bit closer to home for a lot of people today.
Oh, what's that?
Think about interacting with consumer tech every single day. Think about trying to force a modern smartphone charger into an outdated port.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. You've got a brand new USB-C cable, and you are trying to jam it into a 10-year-old micro USB port. You can push, you can shove, you can get incredibly frustrated, you can wiggle it around and bend the metal pins.
But it's never going to work.
No. But you wouldn't blame the charger, would you? You wouldn't look at the cable and say, this is a terrible, stupid charger with a moral failing.
No, of course not.
Nor would you blame the old device for not accepting it. They are both perfectly functional, highly engineered pieces of technology. They just aren't a match. The interface is structurally wrong.
And that interface mismatch is exactly where the trauma of the square peg comes from, because unlike a USB cable, a human being has feelings.
Unfortunately.
Right. When an unconventional person is repeatedly hammered into a round hole, they begin to internalize that splintering as a personal defect.
Oh, wow.
They think, everyone else seems to fit into this corporate structure perfectly fine. Everyone else seems to navigate these office politics without exhausting themselves. Why does it hurt me so much? I must be defective.
But wait, I have to push back on this just a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't a significant part of growing up, of maturing into an adult, learning how to adapt?
Yeah.
We can't all just demand a custom-shaped, bespoke hole for our specific personalities. At some point, if you want a paycheck, if you want to participate in society, don't you have to learn to file down your own corners just a little bit?
That is a really vital distinction to make. Adaptation and compromise are absolutely necessary for social cohesion.
Right.
Filing down a rough edge to be polite or learning a skill outside your comfort zone, that is healthy adaptation. But the idiom of the square peg isn't about minor adjustments. It's about a fundamental core incompatibility.
I see.
You can sand the edges of a square peg slightly, sure, but you cannot turn a rigid square into a perfect circle without destroying the vast majority of its original mass.
That makes a lot of sense.
When someone is truly a square peg, forcing them to conform doesn't just make them polite, it erodes their identity, it crushes their innate talents, and inevitably leads to severe burnout or depression.
So it's the difference between wearing a suit to a wedding, when you prefer sweatpants, versus forcing a naturally introverted, highly sensitive researcher to work as an aggressive, cold-calling telemarketer for 40 hours a week.
Precisely. The former is adaptation, the latter is structural violence to their personality. And this is why I want you, the listener, to take a mental step back right now. Reflect on a time in your own life when you felt exactly like that square peg.
I'm sure everyone has at least one example.
Absolutely. Maybe it was a job that looked absolutely perfect on paper, a highly sought-after position, but every single day you went to the office, it felt like you were dragging yourself through wet mud.
Oh, I've been there.
Or maybe it was a specific major in university where the teaching style completely clashed with the way your brain naturally processes information. What the geometry of this phrase beautifully illustrates is that this intense discomfort is an environmental mismatch.
Right.
It is a data point about your surroundings, not a verdict on your soul. You are a highly functional square peg. You just need to find a square hole.
So let's follow the narrative arc of our eccentric individual here. They've recognized the friction. They realize they are splintering the wood of their current environment. What happens if you actually take that square peg, you stop hitting it with a hammer of conformity, and you drop them into the right environment? So you pull them out of that strict accounting firm and you drop them into a messy art studio, a chaotic tech startup, or an experimental writer's room.
Well, that environmental shift is where the magic happens.
The friction goes away.
Once you remove the exhausting daily requirement to constantly conform to the round hole, their weirdness, their inherent squareness, those sharp, abrasive edges, suddenly transitions into their greatest operational strength.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right, because they are no longer wasting 80% of their cognitive energy just trying to mimic normal behavior, so they can apply that energy to entirely rethinking the parameters of what they are doing.
They realized the rules they were failing to follow were just suggestions all along.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the next phase of the beautifully bizarre vocabulary. Rechanneling that friction by learning to color outside the lines.
I love this one. The transition from physical geometry to childhood nostalgia here is incredibly telling about how society actually views creativity.
The nostalgia of this phrase is just fantastic, isn't it?
Oh, it really is.
It immediately transports you back to the sensory experience of early childhood. Picture it, you are 5 years old. You are sitting at a tiny, brightly colored plastic desk. You can literally smell the wax of the crayons.
I can smell it right now.
Right. And the authority figure, the teacher, walks around and hands out a stack of identical coloring books to the class. The pages are filled with these rigid, thickly printed black lines, forming a predetermined picture: a house, a smiling dog, an apple tree.
Very structured.
And the instruction from the teacher is crystal clear. It's our very first formal, institutionalized lesson in societal conformity. The mandate is color the picture, make it pretty, but you must stay strictly inside the printed black lines.
And it is a lesson in fine motor control, certainly. But on a deeper psychological level, it is the earliest training we receive in respecting arbitrary boundaries.
Wow.
The black lines represent the limits of the acceptable world. The teacher is establishing a precedent here. Is the structure we have provided for you. Your only job is to fill it in without disturbing the outline.
But then you have the eccentric, highly imaginative child.
It's square peg.
The square peg of the kindergarten class. They look at those rigid black lines forming the dog, and they just fundamentally reject the entire premise of the exercise.
They're just not having it.
They aren't interested in obedience. They grab a bright purple crayon, and instead of carefully, meticulously filling in the shape, they draw wild, sweeping, chaotic purple arcs all over the entire page. They draw over the dog, over the house, right off the edge of the paper onto the desk. They ignore the constraints completely.
And, if you are grading purely on compliance and fine motor skills, that child fails the assignment. It's messy. It's disobedient. But what they have created on that page is entirely original. It is entirely theirs. And this brings us to the fascinating linguistic shift of this phrase. While in childhood, Coloring outside the lines is often corrected or scolded. In adult, corporate, or high-level artistic life, it is considered a massive C2 level professional compliment.
That is so true. To color outside the lines, as an adult, means to think laterally. It means to deliberately ignore traditional constraints, to look at the way an industry has operated for 50 years and intentionally break those established rules in order to invent something completely unprecedented.
It's innovation.
Exactly. The source material points to the example of a modern marketing campaign. Let's say a legacy company is losing market share to younger startups. If they want a new campaign to go truly viral, to capture the cultural zeitgeist, they cannot use the same old, tired, predictable corporate strategies.
Right. The usual won't work.
They can't just buy a billboard and a newspaper ad. They can't stay inside the black lines of what every other competitor has done before.
Or consider a government committee trying to solve a totally unprecedented crisis.
Like what?
Say, a novel global pandemic, or a sudden supply chain collapse. You cannot rely on historical precedent to solve a problem that has never existed in history. The black lines of previous policy will fail you.
Because they don't apply anymore.
Exactly. You require leaders who are willing to color outside the lines to invent entirely new logistical frameworks overnight.
But surely society needs some lines, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if every single person in a society is aggressively coloring outside the lines all the time, you don't get a masterpiece, you just get anarchy.
Well,
You get traffic accidents because people decide the lines on the highway are just suggestions. So how does the unconventional mind distinguish between lines that need to be broken for innovation and lines that keep us from descending into chaos?
What's fascinating here is that is the defining struggle of the visionary. The difference lies in understanding the origin of the lines. Yes. The lines on a highway, or laws against theft, those are structural load-bearing lines. They prevent physical harm and maintain baseline societal trust.
Right, gravity, essentially.
Exactly. But the black lines of business strategy, of artistic expression, of social etiquette, these are almost always entirely arbitrary. We treat them as if they are immutable laws of physics, like gravity, but they're really just agreed upon historical conventions.
That makes total sense.
The people who successfully color outside the lines are the ones who can look at a system and correctly identify which lines are gravity and which lines are just old habits. By breaking the habits, they force the rest of the world to expand its view of what the picture can even be.
It's a beautiful concept. It explains exactly why we need the rule breakers, the disruptors, the artists. They literally drag the rest of us forward.
They do.
But our psychological journey doesn't stop at successful innovation. The source material is very clear that there's a dangerous, often tragic tipping point here.
Yeah, it gets tricky.
Coloring outside the lines is incredibly valuable, right up until the exact moment that the imagination completely detaches from the gravity of reality. Because when you get so used to ignoring boundaries, you might start ignoring the laws of physics themselves.
This is the precise moment where highly beneficial optimism tips over into pure, unadulterated delusion. The eccentric mind becomes so enamored with its own ability to imagine new worlds that it basically forgets it still has to live in this one.
Which introduces the next phase of the beautifully bizarre pie in the sky.
This is a great one.
Now, before we get into the psychology of this, we have to talk about the history, because the origin of this phrase is so jarringly different from how we use it today.
Oh, it's a complete 180.
When you hear pie in the sky, now it sounds whimsical. It sounds like a bakery commercial or a line from a Dr. Seuss book. It sounds completely harmless.
It sounds harmless today, yeah, but its origin is anything but. It doesn't come from baking, it isn't whimsical, and it absolutely wasn't meant to be taken lightly.
So where does it come from?
It originates from a deeply gritty, highly volatile, and very painful era of American history, the labor movements of the early 20th century. Specifically, a 1911 song written by an activist named Joe Hill, who was deeply involved with the industrial workers of the world.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about the height of the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
We are talking about men, women, and children working 12, 14 hours a day in horrific, incredibly dangerous factory conditions for wages that barely kept them from starving. The friction between the working class and the wealthy industrialists was at a literal boiling point.
And in this environment, Joe Hill wrote a song that was deeply, bitterly cynical. The song was explicitly aimed at mocking the corrupt politicians and specifically the conservative preachers of that era.
The preachers.
Yeah, these authority figures were standing up on soapboxes, speaking to these starving, overworked, utterly exploited citizens, and essentially telling them not to unionize, not to strike, not to complain about their earthly suffering.
Because complaining was a sin, right?
Yep.
The promise they were being sold was just a tool of systemic pacification. The preachers were essentially saying, endure this misery, endure the poverty, do not demand better wages from your bosses now, because if you are meek and obedient, when you die and go to a glorious heaven, you will eat pie in the sky.
Right. The original context of the phrase was a malicious lie. It was a cynical mechanism of control designed to keep the working class docile. Shut up and suffer now, you'll get magical sky pie later.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Hill was calling out the utter absurdity of promising starving people imaginary food after they were dead.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Over the last century, as the phrase seeped out of union halls and into the broader English language, the psychological application shifted dramatically.
It really did.
It lost the malicious, manipulative intent of the corrupt preacher, but it retained the core element of absolute impossibility. Today, it evolved to describe a wildly optimistic, deeply appealing, but utterly utopian vision of the future that is spectacularly impractical.
It's pure fantasy.
Right. It describes an idea that has absolutely zero chance of ever actually happening.
Today, when someone proposes a pie in the sky idea, they usually aren't trying to manipulate you. They genuinely, passionately believe it themselves. The delusion is internal.
Ah, I see.
The source material uses a fantastic modern example for this. Someone earnestly explaining their highly detailed, multi-phase plan to colonize Mars, terraform the atmosphere, and build a flawless, conflict-free utopian society by next year.
The vision is incredible. They have the architectural drawings, they've designed the flag, it sounds wonderful. But the harsh, gravity-bound reality check is the person proposing this massive societal restructure doesn't even own a spaceship.
Exactly.
They don't have funding, they don't have engineering degrees, they have colors so far outside the lines that they are literally drawing on the air.
Or consider the classic political example we see repeated in almost every election cycle across the globe.
Well, this happens constantly.
Right. A charismatic politician stands up at a podium and earnestly promises the crowd, vote for me, and in my first year, I will completely eliminate all of your income taxes, and simultaneously, I will magically double all of our social services, build new schools, and pave every road in the country.
It is mathematically, economically, and logically impossible. You cannot cut revenue to zero and double expenditures. It defies the basic laws of accounting. It is pure pie in the sky, but people vote for it. Why?
That's the million-dollar question.
If it's so obviously impossible, why do these eccentric visionaries manage to convince themselves, and often millions of other people, that the pie is real?
Because the human brain is highly susceptible to the comfort of the utopian vision.
Okay.
The reality of incremental progress is slow, it's boring, and it's full of compromises. The visionary offers a shortcut. They offer a reality where all the painful constraints of the current world simply vanish. And for the eccentric mind, the one that has always felt like a square peg, the current reality is already painful. So they are highly motivated to believe that a completely different, entirely flawless reality is just around the corner if they just believe hard enough.
It's deeply ironic. A phrase born from the literal starvation and bloody physical struggle of 20th century laborers is now so frequently used to describe tech bro fantasies in Silicon Valley boardrooms or political pipe dreams in debate halls.
It's quite a journey.
We've shifted from the absolute poorest, most marginalized people being lied to often the most privileged people lying to themselves. But the core psychological delusion remains exactly the same. The refusal to accept the limits of the present reality.
So we have an unconventional mind that is completely enamored with their pie in the sky idea, but they don't just sit in a room and daydream. These are often highly driven, energetic people. They actually try to execute these impossible visions.
Right, they put in the work.
And this is where we see the incredibly flawed, sometimes tragic logic of impossible pursuits.
When you are chasing something that isn't real, when your ultimate goal is a phantom, you can't use standard logic to get there. You have to invent bizarre, twisted justifications for your actions.
You do.
And inevitably, because the foundation is flawed, that logic leads you in completely the wrong direction.
Which brings us out of the industrial era and straight into the dark woods of the American frontier. We are talking about barking up the wrong tree.
This is a very specific, highly kinetic scenario that perfectly, almost tragically captures a very common cognitive error we all make: confirmation bias paired with the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, let's get into the sensory details of this one, because the history paints such a vivid picture.
Oh, absolutely.
You have early American hunters in the dense, dark woods. It's nighttime. They're using packs of highly trained hounds to hunt raccoons. Now, raccoons are not deer. They aren't just going to run in a straight line across an open field until they are exhausted. Raccoons are incredibly intelligent, highly adaptable, and very tricky survivalists. They are masters of their environment.
Exactly.
They use the verticality of the forest to their advantage. A raccoon being chased by a loud, chaotic pack of dogs will scramble straight up the trunk of a tall oak tree. The dogs, whose entire world is dictated by their sense of smell, follow that strong, fresh scent on the bark right to the base of that specific tree.
But what the dogs don't realize, because they are hyper-focused on the scent trail in front of their noses, is that the raccoon hasn't stayed in that tree.
Sneaky.
Right. While the dogs are looking up from the ground, barking at the trunk, the raccoon has silently navigated across the overlapping branches high up in the canopy. It has jumped from the oak to a maple, completely crossed over to a different tree, and quietly shimmied down or hidden entirely out of sight. The scent trail ended, but the prey is gone.
But the dogs are absolutely convinced.
They're sure of it.
They have the scent. They have the tree. They put in the physical labor of chasing the animal to this exact spot. The logic seems utterly sound to their canine brains. So they sit at the base of that first entirely empty tree and they bark wildly into the dark branches. They are expending massive amounts of physical and vocal energy entirely, 100% certain they have cornered their prey. But the tree is completely empty.
It is the perfect embodiment of pursuing a false lead. Idiomatically, to bark up the wrong tree means to make a completely incorrect initial assumption, to stubbornly follow a fundamentally flawed line of logic, or to aggressively accuse the wrong person.
Yeah.
And the truly tragic part of this metaphor is that the effort itself is genuine. The dogs aren't being lazy. They're trying very, very hard. But because their foundational assumption, the raccoon is currently in this specific tree, is wrong, all other strenuous effort is rendered completely useless.
It's the ultimate trap of confirmation bias. The dogs want the raccoon to be in the tree so badly because finding it validates their effort that they refuse to consider the possibility that it escaped.
That makes total sense.
In human terms, the source material gives some great grounded examples. Imagine a serious legal scenario. The police are investigating a complex financial crime. Based on some initial circumstantial evidence, the lead detective becomes absolutely convinced the company's CFO is the mastermind.
The detective has his tree.
Exactly. And because he is so convinced, he pours all the department's resources into investigating this one man. They subpoena his emails, they tail his car, they interrogate his assistants. They spend 6 months building a massive case. But it turns out the CFO was on medical leave when the fraud occurred and has a flawless, ironclad alibi.
Oh, no.
He literally could not have done it. The detective was barking up the wrong tree. All that police work, all those taxpayer dollars, completely wasted because the detective refused to look at the other trees in the forest.
Or take a much more mundane, everyday example that happens in offices everywhere. I'm ready. You open the communal office fridge, you see your carefully packed, expensive artisanal sandwiches gone, and you immediately march over and aggressively accuse your cubicle mate of stealing it because they mentioned they were hungry an hour ago.
You've made an assumption based on proximity.
Exactly. Yeah. But your cubicle mate has a severe, well-documented gluten allergy, and your sandwich was on thick wheat bread.
Oh, that's bad.
You are barking up the wrong tree. Your blinding certainty, fueled by your anger over the stolen lunch, has completely obscured the actual logical facts of the situation.
So, if we look at this through the lens of our eccentric visionary chasing their pie in the sky, they often spend years barking up the wrong tree. They pour investor money, personal relationships, and endless hours into a flawed prototype or a doomed political campaign, completely convinced they are on the verge of a breakthrough.
But eventually,
the sun comes up, the dogs can clearly see the branches are empty, the reality sets in, the mistake is undeniable and staring them right in the face.
And this is where the psychological profile gets incredibly volatile. When a highly unconventional, emotionally driven mind realizes they have failed, when they realize they've been barking at an empty tree for months, they rarely opt for a nuanced, measured, incremental correction.
They don't just say, oh, my mistake, let me adjust my aim by 5 degrees.
No, they don't adjust. They panic. deep existential panic sets in. The cognitive dissonance of their grand vision colliding with absolute failure is just too painful to process logically. So they drastically, spectacularly overreact.
Which introduces perhaps the most visceral and frankly the most gross historical metaphor in our entire vocabulary toolkit today: throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
It is a striking image, to say the very least. Once you understand the historical logistics behind it, it becomes an incredible potent descriptor for a specific type of psychological self-sabotage.
Right.
We are time traveling again, leaving the American woods and heading to 16th century Europe. I want you to imagine a muddy, historical European village. Hygiene practices in this era were, well, they were not exactly spa-like.
No, definitely not.
Drawing hot water for a bath was not a matter of turning a shiny chrome dial. It was a massive, incredibly labor-intensive household chore.
You had to physically fetch heavy wooden buckets of water from a communal well, haul them all inside the house, chop wood, build a massive roaring fire, heat the water up in a heavy iron cauldron over hours, and then painstakingly poured into a large communal wooden tub.
Because it was such a resource-heavy, time-consuming, and physically exhausting process, you certainly did not draw a fresh, clean bath for every single individual person in the household. That would be an unthinkable waste of resources.
Absolutely unthinkable.
Entire extended families, and sometimes even the household servants, shared the exact same tub of water.
And society, even in its bathing habits, enforces structure. There was a very strict, culturally enforced hierarchy to the bathing order. The lord of the house, the patriarch, he gets the fresh, clean, piping hot water first. Then, in descending order of societal importance at the time, the other adult men of the house would bathe. Then the adult women, then the older children. And finally, at the very bottom of the bathing hierarchy, dead last in line, were the babies.
Now, by the time it was finally the infant's turn to get placed in that wooden tub, you have to imagine what that water physically looked like.
Disgusting.
Several adults who perhaps hadn't bathed in weeks or even months, working agricultural or dirty manual labor jobs, have all washed the dirt, sweat, and grime off their bodies in it. The water wasn't just slightly soapy, it was thick. It was dark, entirely opaque, and utterly disgustingly filthy.
And the joke, the really dark, morbid peasant humor that birthed this phrase among the common people was that the water was so incredibly murky and dark that a tired, overworked, careless mother might carry the heavy tub over to the window to empty it and literally throw the dirty water out into the street without checking to see if the baby was still sitting in the bottom of the tub.
It's a horrifying slapstick image of ultimate negligence. But idiomatically, it is a brilliant, unparalleled descriptor for a massive, irrational overreaction.
Yeah.
In a panicked attempt to eliminate something bad, the filthy, disgusting, unusable bathwater, you act so carelessly, so hastily, and so drastically that you accidentally destroy or discard something highly valuable and absolutely essential. The baby.
It is the ultimate nuclear option of problem solving. It's scorched earth. The source material uses an excellent, highly relatable modern example of coding a website.
Oh, this is a great one.
Let's say a tech startup, led by an eccentric visionary, launches a brand new platform. The engineering team has worked on the back-end code for 8 months. The database is robust, the security is flawless. But when they launch the beta version, the specific font they chose for the headers looks terrible. It's unreadable on mobile devices.
The bathwater in this scenario is incredibly minor. It's just the ugly font. If you are thinking logically in the shallow end of the pool, you just go into the CSS, you change the font family, and you push an update. It's a 5-minute fix.
But our eccentric lead developer, realizing they made a mistake, panics. The perfectionism kicks in. Instead of just scooping out the bad water, they delete the entire repository.
Oh my goodness.
They crash hundreds of thousands of lines of perfectly good backend code. They format the servers and they scream at the team. It's all ruined. It's fundamentally flawed. We have to start completely from scratch. They threw the baby the 8 months of perfect back-end coding out with the bathwater.
Or consider a cultural, artistic example. You go to the cinema to watch a highly anticipated 3-hour epic movie. The acting is Oscar-worthy. The cinematography is breathtaking. The thematic resonance is profound.
Sounds like a great movie.
But the final 5 minutes of the script, the ending, is poorly written and leaves a plot hole. If you walk out of the theater, get on social media, and tell all your friends that entire movie was absolute irredeemable garbage, 1 out of 10, a complete waste of film, burn it all, you are dismissing the vast majority of incredibly valuable artistic elements because of one localized flaw.
I want to unpack the psychology of why this happens, though, because it's not just random stupidity. It brings us right back to the friction we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive. Unconventional minds often perceive the world in complex systems and holistic, interconnected visions. When they are creating something, they are coloring outside the lines to build a complete, cohesive, perfect picture in their head.
So if one piece of that picture is fundamentally flawed, if they realize they've been barking up the wrong tree on a key element, the cognitive dissonance is absolutely agonizing for them.
Exactly. To their highly sensitive, perfectionist mind, the localized flaw corrupts the entire system. A drop of poison ruins the whole well.
Oh.
They struggle to compartmentalize. They can't separate the ugly font from the good back-end code. The entire project now feels emotionally tainted by the sting of failure. So the overwhelming emotional impulse is to purge the failure entirely, to wipe the slate perfectly, painfully clean, even if it means destroying their own hard work. It's an inability to tolerate imperfection within their own unconventional, idealized vision.
That is such a profound insight. It's the curse of the perfectionist visionary. If it's not exactly my pie in the sky, it's trash.
Yeah.
Burn it down and start over. But we have to look at the external consequences of this behavior. We've reached a critical juncture in our psychological journey. Our unconventional person is now constantly having these extreme destructive reactions. They are perpetually throwing babies out with bathwaters everywhere they go, burning bridges, restarting projects, alienating their teams. At this point, society's perception of them shifts drastically.
The tolerance runs out. Society has a lot of patience for the quirky innovator, but they have very little patience for a destructive force. The friction has become too high, too unpredictable.
The collateral damage is too great.
Exactly. Society stops seeing them as just a quirky square peg or a bold rule breaker. The narrative shifts, and society starts labeling them as genuinely, clinically unhinged.
Which introduces a phrase that I think almost everyone listening knows, but almost everyone gets the origin of completely wrong. Mad as a hatter.
When you hear the phrase mad as a hatter, where does your mind go immediately?
Lewis Carroll, without a doubt.
Oh.
Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
The bizarre tea party, the oversized top hat with the price tag still on it, the riddles that don't make any logical sense, the chaotic, frantic energy. It feels like a purely literary invention, this whimsical, wacky, fictional character meant to entertain Victorian children.
And that is the wildly prevalent, culturally accepted myth. But the historical truth is much darker, much sadder, and the idiom significantly predates Alice in Wonderland's publication. Lewis Carroll wasn't inventing a concept, he was borrowing a phrase that was already heavily established in the public lexicon of his time.
Right.
And it was based on a very real, very tragic, widespread medical reality from the 18th and 19th centuries.
This is where history gets genuinely grim, and it shows how society uses language to distance itself from tragedy.
Wow.
Let's talk about the actual hatters. The working-class tradesmen who physically manufactured hats for a living during this period.
In those centuries, stiff felt and fur top hats were the absolute height of men's fashion across Europe and America. You couldn't be considered a respectable gentleman without one.
Right, everyone wore them.
And to make the felt and animal fur for these hats stiff, durable, and pliable enough to shape over a mold, the hat makers used a chemical process called carroting. This process required the extensive daily use of a highly toxic heavy metal substance, liquid mercury.
So you had these working class men sitting in these cramped, poorly lit, incredibly poorly ventilated urban workshops day in and day out for 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And they're leaning directly over vats of steaming liquid mercury, working the felt with their bare hands.
Just breathing it in.
Exactly. They're inhaling these toxic mercury fumes constantly every single working day for years on end.
And what we know now with the benefit of modern medicine and occupational safety laws, which they didn't fully understand then, is that prolonged exposure to mercury vapor causes devastating, irreversible neurological damage. It is severe, cumulative heavy metal poisoning.
The physical and psychological effects were horrific. The source material notes they would develop intense physical tremors. These tremors were so common, they were actually known formally in the medical community at the time as Hatter's shakes. They couldn't hold their hands still, they couldn't hold the cup of tea.
It's just tragic.
But it was the psychological degradation that was most visible and disturbing to the general public.
The mercury attacked the central nervous system. It caused extreme volatile mood swings, terrifying, vivid hallucinations, and a profound, crippling social anxiety. The workers would become deeply paranoid, erratic, and utterly unable to interact normally with society. They would lash out, or withdraw entirely into a state of terrified isolation.
The general public living in these cities observe this deeply bizarre, disturbing, and unpredictable behavior clustered in the hat-making districts. But they didn't understand the chemistry.
No, of course not.
They didn't know about heavy metal neurotoxicity. They just saw the correlation. Hat makers went crazy, and thus the phrase "mad as a hatter" was coined by the public to describe someone who had completely lost their mind.
It's a fascinating look at how society weaponizes language. Instead of addressing the horrific industrial conditions that were poisoning these men, society simply labeled them mad. It placed the defect on the individual rather than the system. It's a way of marginalizing what we don't understand and cannot control.
I always find it so jarring to reflect on the dark apathy of the English language. How we can take a horrific, systemic workplace safety disaster, literally thousands of working men being slowly neurologically destroyed by their livelihood, and over the passage of time, we just watch the tragedy out of it until it becomes a casual, lighthearted phrase to describe a wacky coworker or a silly idea. Used so breezily now.
Today, the tragic historical context is entirely divorced from the modern psychological application. When we say someone is mad as a hatter now, we are not diagnosing heavy metal poisoning. We are using it to describe someone who is utterly eccentric, completely unpredictable, or whose ideas and behaviors seem entirely divorced from our shared reality.
The source gives two great examples of how it's used today. First, to describe a physical impossibility or a wild ambition. You have to be mad as a hatter to think you could swim across that freezing ocean in the middle of winter. It's pointing out the sheer, undeniable insanity of the proposition.
And the second example is more about profound societal withdrawal, which mirrors the isolation of the original hatters. Imagine a man who spends 10 years living entirely alone in a remote cabin in the deep desert, completely isolated from human contact, surviving on his own. When he finally emerges and re-enters civilization, his behavior, his speech patterns, his way of relating to the modern world will be so far outside the accepted norm that society will instinctively label him mad as a hatter. It's the label we apply when the gap between an individual's internal logic and society's external rules becomes too wide to bridge.
We've gone from the playful, innocent rebellion of the purple crayon to the deep, isolated paranoia of the desert. But there is one final step in our outline.
The last boundary.
Yes, one last psychological boundary.
Yeah.
What happens when the person who is labeled mad as a hatter, who is constantly misunderstood, constantly creating friction, loses their very last tenuous grip on logic, on emotional regulation, and on any remaining ability to function within society? They cross the final edge.
They reach the absolute point of no return, the total failure of emotional regulation. In English, we say they have gone off the deep end.
The metaphor here is incredibly evocative because, unlike 16th century bathtubs or 19th century hat making, it relies on a physical sensation that almost every single one of us has experienced at some point in our lives, being in a swimming pool.
Picture yourself wading into a large municipal pool. When you are standing in the shallow end, you are fundamentally safe. You have agency. Your feet are planted firmly on the solid concrete floor of the pool.
It's very stable.
Exactly. The water might be up to your waist, you might be splashing around, you might even get pushed by a small wave. But if you lose your balance, you just stand up. You are in the water, you are playing the game, you might be having fun or struggling slightly, but you are grounded. You maintain physical control of your circumstances because you have a foundation.
But then you start walking toward the other side of the pool. The floor starts to slope downward, gently at first, then steeper. And suddenly you take one step forward and you reach the drop-off, the deep end.
In the deep end, the floor completely drops away. You can no longer reach the bottom, no matter how far you stretch your toes. You have absolutely no solid footing. If you jump or slip into the deep end without knowing how to tread water or swim, you are jumping into a terrifying void.
It's true panic.
A space where you have absolutely no foundation, no physical leverage, and zero control over your environment. The water takes over entirely, gravity fails you, and you are just flailing to survive.
That terrifying sensation of the floor vanishing beneath your feet is the perfect, visceral, psychological application for this idiom. To go off the deep end means to suddenly and often very dramatically lose your emotional control. It is the complete structural collapse of your rationality or your connection to reality, resulting in an extreme, unhinged reaction. It's not just having a bad day. It's not just being in a grumpy mood in the shallow end. It's a structural collapse of composure. The floor is gone.
If we connect this to the broader picture of human psychology, it beautifully encapsulates the loss of psychological grounding. When you are emotionally grounded, you have a solid floor beneath you. You can process frustration. You can receive bad news, process it, and stay in the shallow end.
You stay rational.
Exactly. When you go off the deep end, frustration entirely overrides your central nervous system. The source material uses a very relatable, everyday example to illustrate the disproportionate nature of this reaction. Imagine you are at a restaurant, you've had a long day, and the waiter informs you they have just run out of your favorite coffee.
A minor inconvenience if you are in the shallow end. You sigh, you feel a brief flash of annoyance, you order a cup of tea instead, and you move on with your life. You are grounded.
But if you have lost your grounding, if the friction of being a square peg, of chasing pie-in-the-sky ideas, of barking up wrong trees has eroded your emotional floor over months or years, you are at the breaking point, and when you finally go off the deep end over that coffee, your reaction is wildly disproportionate to the event.
You completely lose it.
You don't just complain, you start screaming at the walls, you yell at the terrified waiter, you throw your menu across the room, you act as if a fundamental, life-altering tragedy has occurred over a beverage.
Or the other example provided a sudden computer glitch. You're working on a crucial document, the program unexpectedly crashes, and it didn't save your last hour of work. It is incredibly frustrating. We've all been there. We've all wanted to yell at the screen.
Who hasn't?
Right. But going off the deep end means completely losing your grip on reality, smashing the expensive keyboard with your fists, breaking down into hysterical, uncontrollable tears on the office floor, utterly unable to calm down or rationalize that the document can simply be rewritten. The floor has dropped away, and the raw emotion has completely, violently engulfed the logic.
It is the absolute edge of human psychology, neatly and terrifyingly packaged into a mundane swimming metaphor.
Let's take a deep breath. Because what an incredible, intense, and somewhat exhausting psychological journey we've just mapped out today. We set out at the beginning of this hour to explore the beautifully bizarre vocabulary used to describe eccentric minds. And we have essentially, step by step, charted the entire psychological life cycle of a person struggling to survive in a world built for conformity.
It is a remarkable, almost tragic trajectory when you look at it in sequence, laid out end to end. The vocabulary perfectly tracks the escalation of friction.
We started with the innate structural pain of the square peg in a round hole, that initial isolating realization that your geometry just doesn't fit the mold society has prepared for you. Then we saw the joyful, defiant, highly productive rebellion of coloring outside the lines, where breaking the arbitrary rules actually leads to incredible innovation. But we saw how that unrestrained imagination can drift too far from gravity, leading to the utopian, impossible delusions of pie-in-the-sky ideas.
Which, as we discussed with the raccoon dogs, inevitably leads to the flawed, wasted, stubbornly misguided effort of barking up the wrong tree.
And when the harsh realization of that failure finally hits the perfectionist mind, we get the panicked, destructive, scorched earth overreaction of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If an eccentric person creates that kind of destruction enough times, society loses its patience and officially labels them as utterly unhinged or mad as a hatter. Until finally, the cumulative weight of that friction snaps the last fragile thread, the floor drops away, and they completely go off the deep end.
This vocabulary we've explored today really is a cinematic toolkit. It allows you to do so much more than just vaguely say someone is weird or crazy.
They're so flat.
Those are such flat, unhelpful, undescriptive words. These historical idioms give you the precision to articulate nuanced observations about the unconventional people in your own life. Because let's face it, we all know these people.
Oh, definitely.
You might be dealing with the eccentric black sheep of your family at a tense holiday dinner. You might be trying to manage a chaotic, visionary genius in your office environment who keeps throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Or perhaps you are recognizing these beautifully bizarre traits within your own reflection.
It gives you the language to understand the friction, rather than just being annoyed or terrified by it.
No.
And so, as we wrap up, we want to turn this back to you, the listener. We've thrown a lot of history, from 16th century hygiene to 20th century labor strikes, at you today. But these words only truly matter if they resonate with your own lived experience. So I want you to really think about it. Have you ever felt like a square peg in a round hole? I know I certainly have, more times than I can count.
Same here.
And more importantly, what did you do about it? Did you try to painfully whittle off your own corners to fit the corporate hole? Or did you have the courage to walk away and go find a square hole?
Or perhaps you've been on the observing end of this life cycle. Have you ever watched someone you know completely go off the deep end over something incredibly silly and inconsequential, like a minor typo in an email or a missing sandwich? How did you handle being in the splash zone when they lost their footing?
The human experience is incredibly messy, and these phrases help us navigate that mess with a little more grace, a little more humor, and a lot more understanding. But before we sign off and leave you to your day, we want to leave you with one final, hopefully provocative thing to chew on. We've explored all this rich language today, but there's a flip side to this coin that we haven't touched on.
It's a fascinating thought experiment to end on. We have spent this entire deep dive looking closely at the incredibly colorful, specific, sometimes cruel words that normal, conforming society invented to describe the people who don't fit in. The eccentrics, the visionaries, the square pegs. But it makes you wonder if history had played out differently, if society had been built the other way around, if the world's default settings, our schools, our corporate structures, and our social rules were actually designed by the eccentric people, the mad hatters, and the rule breakers. What kind of idioms would they have invented to describe the rest of us? The people who follow the rules so blindly and color so neatly, so predictably inside the black lines.
What a question. We'll let you think about that one. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. See you next time.